Now, we say quite often, and it's true, elections have consequences. We've seen that over the last 4 years. And the elections here in the United States don't just have consequences for our nation, but they also have consequences for other nations as well. And we've clearly seen that throughout the Biden-Harris administration. No doubt America's adversaries like Iran are watching this election very closely. Israeli intelligence has even suggested that Tehran may be preparing to attack the Jewish nation sometime after the election, but before the inauguration. An attack that Iran's Ayatollah says would be teeth-breaking. Now, how might the outcome of this election alter the trajectory of the conflict in the Middle East? And what could the implications be for the rest of the world, as well as for the U.S.? Joining us now in studio with his analysis on the situation is retired Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, Executive Vice President here at the Family Research Council. General Boykin spent his last 4 years of his 36-and-a-half-year military career serving as the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. He was one of the original members of the U.S. Army's Delta Force. General Boykin, welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Here.
It's good to be here with you.
So let's talk first. What is your reaction to what we're hearing from Iran about a response to Israel's retaliatory attack against them?
Yeah, if you go through and look at it very carefully, the Iranians are kind of sending, in my view, two signals. One is that it's going to be bone crushing, it's going to be tooth breaking. And then you also have the foreign minister that's over in Pakistan speaking to the world media saying, we don't want war. We don't want war. But if we have to, and you know the rest. But I think what was important was that he was saying that we would respond proportionately. So he wasn't talking about, he says on the one hand, we'll respond with a crushing response. And on the other hand, he says, but it'll be proportionate. So which is it?
Well, is that bravado?
It's bravado, yeah.
Because Israel in their last strike, precision strikes, took out their air defense systems. They took out some the first time, but they took them out this time, took out some of their missile fuel systems. Mm-hmm. So they've been incapacitated for the creation of more missiles. Iran says, Iranian officials say that they will use more powerful warheads than any previously used in their strikes against Israel. What else do they have in their arsenal?
Well, they certainly have nukes. I think there is a very good chance that they have nuclear weapons, or if they don't have them, they're pretty close to having them. And I think that that's been an issue throughout this whole administration as to what are we doing about trying to slow them down on the development of a nuclear weapon? And the answer is nothing. We've been giving them money. We've given them money multiple times. And you know where that went? It not only went to Hamas and Hezbollah, but it also went into the nuclear program. And I think that they have that. But
do they have the capacity to deliver it?
The delivery problem, I think, is still a problem for them. But I don't know. I don't think that. I think somebody in our intelligence community knows, because the Israelis have probably given them some intelligence that would give them a clear understanding of what they do have. But I do think that, from my perspective, they kept their centrifuges spinning. Even with that JCPOA, they kept the centrifuges spinning. So they've been developing up to weapons-grade plutonium.
General Boykin, as we move in, I mean, today's election day, we'll have the results tonight. Hopefully, hopefully in the short order, we'll know who the next president of the United States is going to be. But there's going to be a period between now and January where we have a true lame duck president. Does this create a period of vulnerability for the Middle East and for the United States?
Yes, it does. But I would be more concerned about China. China has told us they want Taiwan under the mothership. The mothership is Beijing. And I think that if they have the opportunity, because we have proven nothing but weakness in this administration, and if Kamala is elected, it'll be another 4 years, and somewhere in there they're going to take Taiwan. They're going to try to take Taiwan. I'm not sure that they can, to be honest with you, with anything short of a nuclear weapon. But I think that's a very vulnerable period, and I don't think that Kamala Harris, as President of the United States, would have any idea what to do. And I don't agree with the president or the former president that she's got warmongers around her. She didn't have anybody around her. She doesn't have a cabinet or anything. So I think that they would take advantage of Joe Biden's weakness.
While the focus is on the Middle East, on Iran and Israel, you're saying that is an open door for China to make a move on Taiwan.
Right. We just developed. We just launched a carrier group.
Right.
Back over to the Middle East over there. So we're putting everything over there right now.
I was fixing to ask you. That's where we have our assets right now in the Middle East, trying to keep Iran in check, which opens things up in the Pacific.
In my mind, it does. Yes, absolutely. Because they've told us they want Taiwan, and they want it back under their control. I thought they might do it before we got to this point, quite frankly. But that said, I think that that's a very vulnerable period, in that lame duck period that you're talking about there. I think it's a frightening period of time for me.
So let's talk about Israel during this time period. There's I've heard some reports, read some reports that Iran, even talking about troops possibly going into Israel. I have a hard time seeing that, ground troops going in. If there's any action toward Israel, we know Israel is going to respond. They've taken out, as I mentioned earlier, the air defense systems in Iran, opening up both their oil fields and making way to the nuclear facilities. Would this be a time, if provocation is there, for Israel to respond?
Well, certainly, it would give them a window of opportunity that wouldn't probably last too long. But yes, I think
especially if you have a Harris that would happen to be elected.
If you have what?
If Kamala Harris were to be elected president.
Absolutely, worst scenario. That's the worst case scenario.
So now would be the time for if she is in the waiting to be president, this would be the time for them to act.
That's right.
Now they showed in the October raid that the retaliatory strike against Iran, that they could do this on their own. To my knowledge, I've not seen where the U.S. aided them in that strike against Iran. Am I correct or not?
Well, I'm thinking back of a project that I worked when I was still in the Pentagon. I'm sure that the intelligence that they used, some of that came from the United States. So I think we did give them at least intelligence as to where these things that they were going to bomb, these military installation, these storage depots, that type of thing. I'm quite sure that we gave them.
But in terms of the mechanics of their fighter jets, the refueling, all of that activity was done by the Israeli Defense Forces?
I don't know that. That's the problem. There wasn't. I'll just say this and try to stay out of trouble. There has been a plan for the United States to be prepared to support them. It was aimed at supporting them if they were developing nuclear weapons, and it's an old plan. But there was some, and this is a different administration, but there was some discussion and thought that went into what would the United States need to do to help them, and one of their limitations was tankers. And we would have to provide them with tankers. And then there was also, I don't think it was any secret, that the Saudi Arabia said to them, we'll give you an airfield that you can refuel and rearm. And I don't know whether that's still intact or not, but that was part of what they were depending on to be able to go in there. It's a long way over to where they got to go.
So, General Jerry Boykin, when we look at the geopolitical landscape in the Middle East, we look at it from both a political standpoint as well as a military standpoint. The Middle East is on fire right now.
The whole world is, Tony, but the Middle East is the epicenter of it right now.
You spent 36 and a half years in the United States Army. As I mentioned, your last assignment, the Pentagon, was basically in intelligence looking at these things.
Right.
When you look at from a scale of 1 to 10, how vulnerable is the world right now to global conflict?
Well, I think we're certainly above the midpoint. I think we're, as you're talking about the whole world, you're not just talking about America.
Well, I'm talking about America being drawn in as a leader
Right.
to a conflict that has implications worldwide.
Yes, I think that this is a very vulnerable period, and I do see that as a scenario. It's a bad scenario, but I do see that as a scenario, and it may not be Israel. It may wind up being in Europe. And
Well, I didn't ask
the
you about
Ukrainians-
that. I didn't ask you about Ukraine, with North Korea now sending troops to Russia that are there on the Ukraine border, maybe operating there.
Yeah.
How does that change that dynamic?
Well, the Russians are in a bad situation right now. I mean, they got problems at home, among their population and all, but they've expended an awful lot of their resources.
Well, and they have a population problem to begin with. I mean, in terms, they have as the United States does, but they are ahead of us in terms of not having a sustainable population.
That's exactly right. And theoretically, they cannot at this point stop it because they don't have the people there unless they go into China. And this was a scenario that came out by one of the authors recently, not recently, but probably about 10 years ago, that they would have to go into China and grab some of the people along the border there to try and start populating their own country.
Right.
Because they are getting to a point that is dangerously low in terms of the birth rate.
And then you look at the number of casualties that they've suffered in this war with Ukraine, and that's being depleted.
Okay?
Their
Along with
population
their
is being
materiel. I mean, it's their people, but they've lost a lot of materiel.
We've talked about this later on this program, before on this program, how the United States energy policy is the only thing keeping them afloat by making their oil, giving it a market on the global market with China, Iran,
North Korea.
And if we would go back to becoming a world supplier as we were under the previous administration, we could pull the rug out from underneath of them and end this conflict much more quickly.
I'm going to prophesy here.
All right, you got 30 seconds.
If Donald Trump is elected, one of the first things he's going to do is open up the oil fields again and make us self-sufficient with energy.
And that will drive down the global price,
Absolutely.
Which will take away the revenue that these rogue countries are using to fight their wars.
Absolutely.
All right, General Jerry Boykin, I think you're going to be joining us tonight.
I'll be with you.
All right.